Hello, everybody, and good day. Welcome to this DynamicsCon presentation. My name is AJ Ansari. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Dynamics Southwest, or formerly Dynamics Southwest, or now known as DSWI. I'll talk today about best practices in data migration. This was a topic that's kind of come up from years of having implemented Dynamics 365 Business Central and its predecessor, Dynamics Nav. I think it's one of those topics that invariably comes up with some level of complications or complexity. It's supposed to be something straightforward. I think everybody needs to migrate data when you're moving from an old system to a new one. But over the years, I've found that there's always a misconception on how much, when, where, and so on this needs to happen. And so over the years of doing this, we've all found some best practices, and I've summarized mine into a presentation form. And I hope this is going to be a useful presentation for you. So by way of agenda, we'll start off with some background on the topic. We'll talk about understanding ETL. It's a phrase that you may have heard of. If you're talking data migration, then you're talking ETL, whether you know it or not. And we'll explain what that is for the benefit of anybody who's not familiar. Talk about what and how much to bring over. And in the context of that, we'll also talk about summarizing data, because that's a really important part of data migration. And then I'm going to start wrapping up with some concepts on the general ledger and the subledger link. And you may wonder what that has to do with data migration and why we're talking about that. But you will understand and appreciate this as we get to that point in the conversation. So I'll talk about that, and I'll also talk about something called archive tables and how you could use that for the benefit of your organization. And finally, as I'm wrapping up, I'm going to wrap up with some thoughts on how do you continue using or access to your old system. How do you aggregate data between your old system or in other systems that you have in your environment and your new ERP system, which may be Dynamics 365 Business Central, and how you may do some of those things using BI tools like Microsoft Power BI. So this conversation should take us about somewhere between 35, I think, to 45 minutes. And at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A as well. So once again, I'd like to thank DynamicsCon for this fantastic opportunity to be here in front of you today. This is the first conference in the DynamicsCon world, and so I hope to be back again for future years and future events. So let's get started. Why are we talking about data migration? It happens with every project. I think everybody's done it at least once or twice, if you've, whether you've been on the consulting side or on the end customer side. So this certainly isn't a topic where you think there's a lot to be learned, right? But why are we talking about this? Well, as I said at the onset, over the years of having done this from the consulting side, I've found that even though everybody generally agrees that data must be migrated, there are a lot of questions that are in folks' minds and a lot of things that get left unsaid at the table that rear their ugly heads over the course of the project. And so we're talking about what are we going to migrate? How much are we going to migrate? What tools are we going to migrate, right? So from a tools perspective, this is not a session so much on tools, but I'll stay on this bullet here for just a second. There are some really nice apps now in App Source for Dynamics 365 Business Central that can help you migrate tools from certain systems like QuickBooks into Business Central. Why might you want to use those tools, or why might you not want to use those tools? Well, a big reason or a big decision point should be first understanding what it is that those tools are going to bring in for you. Certain tools are only going to bring in things like master data, and if you're not familiar with that term, I'll explain that later. But there are other tools that will bring in some history. But overall, what I've found is the pre-created tools will always be from the perspective of the body or the organization creating those tools, and will leave something to be desired. So they might get you some of the stuff that you need, but invariably consider the fact that you've got a lot of custom data probably in your old system, custom fields, custom tables, and so on. And those pre-created tools are not going to have an understanding of that custom data, and will definitely leave that behind. So you might want to think that point through as you before you decide to embark on using one of those. And I'm not knocking all tools down. There's some really great ones out there from Microsoft and from third parties that you might want to consider, but perhaps in conjunction to using those tools, there may be some work yet that you have to do. So coming back, who is going to do this, right? This is going to be in some way or shape or form a joint effort, but who's responsible, or who owns what aspect of this data migration? When do you need to do it? That sounds pretty simple. I need to do it up front. But you can't always have everything happen up front, because consider the fact that an implementation project is not an overnight endeavor. Depending on the type and the scale of your integration, of your implementation, you might be looking at something that's as little as 30 days or as much as a year. I've seen some larger implementations take a considerable amount of time. And for those of us who are implementing more enterprise-grade systems like Dynamics 365 F&O, those can be even longer cycles. So you have to consider that just because you've imported something once doesn't mean you're done, or that you'll have everything you need at the beginning to import. And you certainly can't wait till the very end to import everything, because there's going to be a lot of value to having specific data from your old database in your new ERP system. So we'll talk about the when as we talk about best practices. Errors. You're going to have errors of two kinds. What I generally call erroneous or bad data in your old system, but then also errors as you bring in data into your new system, right? Now, if you're bringing data into Business Central, there may be things that you use that exceed the allotted data space within Business Central for a field. So perhaps you're bringing something in that contains 40 characters and the corresponding field in Business Central only allows for 20. Well, Business Central can be extended, so you may suggest, why don't we just extend that field out from 20 to 40? Not so fast. Yes, you could make that 40 characters, but what about all the other fields that it feeds, right? So it may be more than just one field, and having to change one field's data size is going to create this domino impact on all the other fields that this data needs to flow through in the system as you post or record transactions. So you want to really give it some thought. Are you just going to maybe create an additional field? Are you going to customize or extend multiple fields in the new system? Are you going to trim or cut that data? Are you not going to bring that data? What about transactional errors? What about some of the things that you have in the system that just do not have transactional integrity? So those are things too that you need to take care of. And then the what about? What about things that you are not bringing over, right? What about the things that you just can't find a home for that in Business Central? Also, one thing that comes up invariably in my experience has been, great, you've got my master data in, and great, you've got some transactional data, but I sure would love to see every PO we created over the last 20 years, or want to see 5 years of sales history or 20 years of sales history down to the line. I want to see what items were sold, how much we charged, because who knows if customer ABC is going to come back and want that same thing again, and I want to make sure it's at the tip of my fingers when I need it. So what about that? And so we'll talk about it. I'm not going to just talk about this here in this bullet point, because I think that deserves more discussion. So over the course of my slides, you're going to see that's something I'm going to talk about and address. So if you're paying attention, you'll catch us addressing the whatabouts in more than one slide. So let's start off by understanding ETL. Just breaking down data migration. ETL by another name is data migration. Data migration by another name is ETL. It's as simple as extract, transform, load. Because those are the 3 steps that you could break down data migration into. Right? So you need to extract, you need to transform, and load. And as simple as it is, I figure it still warrants a little more discussion, because there is the who, the when, and so on. So let's start off with extract. So you want to get data out of your old system, right? That's the extract part, real simple. How are you going to do it? What are the tools, the who, the when? And now it comes down to who the you is in this equation. Are you a consultant watching my session? Are you an end user? If you're a consultant, you probably can sympathize with what I'm going to say next. You are an expert in a Microsoft ERP system. You may know some other systems. A few of you may be experts in other systems as well, but it's more likely than not that you do not know every ERP system nearly as well as you do the Microsoft product, or your customers coming off of a system that you know next to nothing about. If you're an end customer who's watching this, if you're an end user watching this, then you probably can sympathize with the fact that you know your old system a lot better than your consultant does. And your consultant really knows the Microsoft Business Central system, or a Microsoft F&O system, or whatever it is that you're going to migrate to. So understanding that, you can imagine that the extract responsibility is best, I think, put on the shoulders of somebody on the end user side. even though you may not understand everything about everything, I think you will have either access to somebody who can help you get that data out or know what data to extract. It can be a collaborative effort, but the actual act of exporting that data, I think, should fall on as a best practice on the shoulders of the end user or somebody at the end user side. There may be a lot of different tools, and there are some tools out there that are created by publishers of systems, and then there are others that are just as simple as Excel or CSV. And what I've really found is, by and large, any system that you work with should have the ability to at least export them in a comma-separated value, or CSV, or tab delimited, or an Excel file format. Others, like QuickBooks, may also allow for exporting them in proprietary formats like the IFF files or the IIF files. I forget the extension, but you could get those as well. But primarily, you should be able to extract them in a CSV or an Excel file. And the when part is also important. When is once probably at the beginning of the project, and you'll hear me talk about when's a little bit more, but probably this is an ongoing process for certain things like transactions. We'll talk about that some more. Transform, the T, the second step. So from a transform perspective, we're talking about preparing your data, right? We want to clean this data. There's erroneous data over years of use. You better believe you have customers who you don't transact with anymore, vendors that you haven't transacted with in years, items that you don't sell, or services you don't provide. So there's obsolete data, or there's transactions that you've posted that were done in error, even if they're fully reversed. They're from 5 years ago, and there's really no value to having all that, any erroneous data. I've also known, from my experience, I've seen situations where customers have said, my inventory subledger doesn't tie to the GL anymore, right? Because some systems allow for that type of discrepancy to creep in. And so now all of a sudden, my customer subledger doesn't tie up to my, my general ledger. When you have those situations, when you're transforming this data, this is a great opportunity to correct that. Leave out the things that are erroneous, finally correct or address the things so that when you're bringing them into your new system, you're ironing out all the kinks. That it's an opportunity for a fresh start, and don't underestimate the importance of a fresh start. So this is where we're going to take care of that. What we're also going to do in transform is compress, right? So what we want to do is take chunks of data that you have and put them into bite size. And so what I mean by that is, if you're looking at some historical information, we talk about this again when we get to transactions, you probably don't need to know every single thing that happened every day 5 years ago. Probably having that data from 5 years ago in the month of June, it's sufficient to just know what the net change was for that particular month. What did we start at, and what was the change to the general ledger account over that period? You may not need to know all the quantities of items that you bought and you sold. If at all, you may just need to know how much inventory you had at the end of that month. So what we're doing is taking layers and layers of that transactional data, and we want to compress that, right? So we want to take that, make those big chunks more bite-sized and easy to consume. So who does this and when? This is probably the most collaborative step, because your consultant cannot make your decision for you, but your consultant can sure help you along that path. So I think knowing which customers or vendors or accounts or items are obsolete, that falls more to the end customer, right? But the how do you compress? Is it a great idea to compress this down at the month level to the quarter level or the year level? This is probably a consultative decision. And I think the end user, the end customer, and the consultant together can come together and make this a collaborative effort for the best results. When does this happen? I would say a lot of this has to happen at the outset. You must start pruning and cleaning and compressing your data out at the outset, and the decisions for them must definitely be made at the outset. So even if there are certain parts, incremental parts, that are going to happen afterwards, it's going to be so important that you actually make those decisions that are going to be adhered to over the course of the project. You make those decisions up front. And so then it's just a matter of following the guide, right? Following the path that's been outlined. Of course, the final step is L, or load. And this step is going to be when we're importing this data for the purpose of my discussion into Business Central or to your next ERP system. So who does it, when, and how often? And so I'm going to leave a lot of this open-ended because so much of this conversation happens over the next slides. We're kind of building this, right? It's a it's a slow boil where kind of as we go through this presentation, we're going to get into the details of the how and the best practices. Now, I think if you've ever heard the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step or some variation of that, the journey of an ERP implementation begins with data migration or begins with ETL. So we've covered those basics of ETL, generally understanding what extract, transform, and load is, and generally who those responsibilities fall to. I think it's still fair to at least say on this step, the who for a lot of this is going to be the consultant. The load part should fall 90%, if not more, to the consultant. We do have some projects that we've done that were more prescriptive in nature, right? Smaller businesses or kind of startups where there's more of a DIY attitude and the folks want to take care of themselves. Absolutely, you can master Business Central's, at least from that perspective, Business Central's data migration tools, the rapid start configuration packages, configuration worksheets, edit in Excel, those type of tools you can master and you could do it yourself. But in a traditional consultative deployment scenario, I found it's much faster when the consultant is doing it. Obviously, there would be a cost to that, but I think there's that trade-off you get more value, I think, for the cost because the consultants do this more often and they're probably going to be able to do it a heck of a lot quicker. So let's pivot. Let's talk about what to bring over and how much to bring over. Okay. So I don't talk about myself in the third person very much, but given the whole DynamicsCon comic theme type of thing that we've got going on, I thought I'd kind of do a AJ says slide. This is the first and only time I think you'll see this in the presentation. Businesses often overestimate how much historical data they really need to import. And there's kind of a V over there in the middle that doesn't really belong there. I think AJ should also proofread. So businesses often underestimate how much historical data they really need to import. And they also overestimate how often it's going to be needed. I think we often plan for the what if I need this? And my answer to a lot of those what if questions is, how often do you think you're going to need this? Is this a once a week, once a day, once a month, once a quarter, once a year? And that answer ought to inform you of whether you really need this here or not, right? The same's true for anything, whether it's data or old things that we have, right? So there's a difference between keeping things that carry value, emotional or some other tangible value in our real lives. There's a difference between that and hoarding, where we just refuse to let go of all things just in case they may become of use sometime. So don't be a digital hoarder. I thought that would be kind of mean to put in a slide, but really that's what I'm trying to say. Don't be a digital hoarder. You're not going to need all of it. Chances are that even though you had all this data in your old system, you barely ever look back at things beyond some important stuff like comparative financials and a few things here and there. So think about what you need, how often you're going to need it, right? So what you need. Master data. That's your chart of accounts, your customers, your vendors, your items, your resources if you're a services-based company, right? You want to have those. You want to have supplemental or secondary data. So if you do reporting segments or dimensions, you want to bring that in. Currencies, payment terms, and there's so much more like resource rates. Maybe you do services and you need to know your different rates, or you have items with special pricing and special discounts in your old system. You got to bring that over so that you can have those special prices apply when somebody buys in a certain quantity or between certain dates and stuff like that. So those types of things are all your secondary or supplemental data that would be beneficial to have in your new system. And then there's transactional data, and I put an exclamation because that's really where I think that chasm exists between the consultant and the end customer on what should be brought over, where the customer's fighting the battle to bring it all in, and your consultant is going, hold your horses, you don't need all of this. What do you mean you're going to need this? And so there's this back and forth. So this deserves a slide or three of its own. So let's kind of flip over there. So far, though, what we can all agree on is you're going to need master data, right? There's really no start without it. And you probably want to bring that master data in early on. You're going to want to make sure that as you go through, you have accounts there, you have your customers, vendors. So even within core training sessions or conference room pilots or early pilots that you do, you can start seeing some standard processes in a new ERP system with your data in there. I think it resonates really well with end customer users. It helps with buy-in, if you will. So transactional data, how much? Most businesses only need 1 to 3 years of historical data. What do I mean by that, right? That's enough to run comparative financials. So when you run comparative financials, you're probably running an income statement by month, quarter, or year, and you may want to see a comparison by prior month or prior year or same month last year or something along those lines, last 12 periods, last 4 periods. And those are the levels you're doing it at. I don't know very many businesses, and there's always an exception to the rule, but again, it is an exception to the rule. And that is, there may be some businesses that truly do need to be able to look at things by the weekly or by the daily. But most businesses report on months. As years get older, sometimes you're really only looking at comparatives by quarters. But months usually tend to be where most people can agree on. So you want to be able to run those comparative financials by year or months. You probably don't realize it, but you only look at them summarized. When you're looking at a comparative financial report, you may look at what happened this month or this past month, and you might say, drill down and show me why this number was low. And then you might go and look at all the transactions and go, oh, okay, we didn't get as much for this particular month out of this particular client or this project. And that's fine. Or we exceeded our sales goals because we had this outlier or something happened as a result of a campaign we had, and so on. So you do want to go in and look at it. But you're seldom going to look at data from 2 or 3 years ago and come back and say, drill down on that and show me what happened in 2017 in the month of January. It just doesn't. We don't look at it that way. So you want to keep that historical data summarized. And even though everything's historical data because it's all data from past months, when I'm talking historical here, I'm really talking about things that are outside of the current fiscal year, right? So again, when I talk about only need 1 to 3 years of historical data, I think the implied part is 1 to 3 years of historical data plus whatever's going on in the current fiscal year or current calendar year. I think that you always are going to want to have more detail for that current year. I understand that. That's just what we all run on it. We are going through audits for that period. Your external accountant's probably needing the detail. When you're filing taxes, you might want to go back and look at some stuff. So not challenging you on that at all. I'm talking about things that happen outside of that, right? And then you want to know what you owe and what is owed to you. Your vendors, how much money do you owe them? When is that money owed, right? That's all really important stuff. So you need that. It's probably less important that you know what you bought from that vendor or what you sold to a customer. What you do care about in the new system is, what is it that I owe? When do I owe it? And some kind of transactional identifier so that when an invoice comes in from a vendor, I know that I can apply that to our system's knowledge of what the AP situation is or what the AR is. And then of course, from a transactional, even though it's not quite transactional, it is in some way layering of information. So how much you have. And depending on the type of business you're in, if you trade items, if you sell tangible goods, then we're probably talking about items on hand, right? What is the quantity I have of a certain item? That's important. It's not just the items, or if you sell things that are serialized or lot tracked, right? What is a serial number? What is a lot number? Maybe you warehouse these. Where in the warehouse are they? So that those things are going to be usable in the new system, you must bring that detail in. That's pretty significant. But again, keep in mind, some of these are moving targets. Go back to the what you owe and what is owed to you. On a day-by-day basis, those targets move. You come into the office each day and you're cutting a check or you're being cut a check, right? Or maybe not checks, electronic payments for some of you, and that's great. But that is a moving target. So we can't just assume at the beginning of the project that we're going to have everything. And certainly it's very cumbersome to keep updating that every single day as it happens. So we'll talk about that and kind of when and how often or what we do about that. But these are, in general, the types of transactional data that you probably need and how much. This is kind of that best practice breakdown. Enough to run comparative financials that are summarized, enough to know what you owe and what is owed to you, and enough to know how much you have of items or what type of items. And then if you do fixed assets, et cetera, book value, of those assets, or for inventory, your cost, or how much you have in terms of inventory value. What to bring over and how much. So we continue on that topic. On the general ledger side, we want to make sure then that we're bringing opening balances for each general account, each general ledger account. So we're not talking about this current fiscal year. So let's just say your calendar, your company, and we're now in the 9th month or 10th month of 2020. So when I talk about no older than 3 years, I'm talking about 2020, that's our current year. So 2019, 2018, 2017. So my suggestion is that you're probably not bringing in anything older than 1/1/2019 or 2017, or ideally even 12/31/2017. So you bring in opening balances, run a trial balance in your old system as of maybe 12/31/2017 that captures everything by every general ledger account. Bring that trial balance, and your consultant can help you load that as long as you have all the same accounts that you still want to bring in. Sometimes businesses also use implementation as an opportunity to remap chart of accounts. If you're a business that acquires other businesses or has acquired businesses over the course of the years, this could be an opportunity for you to harmonize your chart of accounts so that each company has the same accounts referenced by the same numbers. One company might have some more accounts or some less accounts, but account 1500 is always going to be AR in each company. Account 2200 could be AP in the same, regardless of the company, and so on. So you can harmonize that, and then as you're bringing those in, you run a trial balance in your old company, you have to remap those balances to the new general ledger accounts in your new ERP system, and you bring that in. All right, so that's your starting position. Now you've got something to run off of. And then what you want to do is, outside of the current fiscal year, best practice is that you're bringing in only net changes for each of those general ledger accounts summarized by month. Quarter, if you're willing to do it, but by month, fine, I get it. This will at least give you month by month a kind of a layering of what's happened. So now you know where you started off as of 12/31/17. Then you know by 1/1/18, 2/1, your 1/31/18, 2/28/18, and so on and so forth, what the changes were, how things have trended. Now, as you're running comparative financial reports, you'll be able to do those month by month. All right, so this gives you some clarity, some detail to run financial reports on. Now, what I always recommend is, as you're doing this, do your due diligence as you bring in each one of these. Don't bring in 12 months or 24 months of data at a time, net changes, and then try to find out where things went wrong, because it'll be like finding a needle in a haystack. So what you want to do, best practice, bring in a month at a time, run that trial balance in the old system, run that trial balance in your new ERP system, right? And hold them up against each other, make sure that everything matches. And for the most part, it should. But when it doesn't, address that then. Don't move forward until you've addressed the discrepancy. And then move forward to the next month and the next month. Otherwise, after bringing in 24, 36 months worth of transactional net changes, you're going to struggle to find out where the differences are, especially if there are multiple errors that happen. So pay careful attention to that. And what you also want to do is for the current fiscal year. So in my example, I said you're a calendar year company, right? So everything from 1/1/2020, go through your old system and just on the general ledger side, bring in every credit and every debit, essentially every transaction. So what you're doing is you're not recreating invoices. All right, this is the first time I'll talk about the general ledger and subledger link. So most systems, including Dynamics 365 Business Central, when you post a transaction, a series of things happen. So if I have a sales transaction and I post it, what's going to happen in Business Central is it's going to record that in what's called a customer ledger. And so basically it's a subledger that says this customer was sold this much and it's owed on this date. So that's a customer subledger, a customer ledger, which is a subledger. But then at the general ledger side, it's going to record some things like my debit to AR, right? And it's going to record the inventory debits or credits or whatever is happening, the cost of goods sold credit, and all those good fun things that happen on the accounting side. So you have debit credit happening on the general ledger side. So that's what we want to bring in. I'm not interested so much in how many pieces of item ABC you sold, but we want to know the debit in dollars and cents to AR. We want to know the credit to cost of goods, credit to revenue, and the debit to cost of goods sold, and credit to inventory, and so on. So those are the things that we want to bring in. So all debits, all credits for each GL account for each period within that current fiscal year. It's a mouthful, but that's what we're looking to do on the general ledger side. So that is a best practice for the general ledger. Now, if you do use dimensions or segments, we certainly would want to break down by those. Not everybody does, so I didn't want to make that be a kind of an important point in every single bullet, but that is a consideration. On the customers and the vendor side, open receivables, open payables. So what do we owe? What are we owed? We talked about that before, or vice versa, I think in this case. The things that we want to remember for our new system are the date of the transaction, the payment terms, so we know the due date. If you've set payment terms in Business Central with the proper formulas, that's great. Then you don't need to type in the due date. Otherwise, you probably also want to type in the due date when you're bringing that in. The who, who's a customer, who's the vendor, what is the amount of the transaction? Are they promised or are you promised any early discounts for payments on those payment terms? Transaction identifiers, what was the invoice number? What is the PO number? What is the external vendor invoice number? And those types of things. Again, you don't need to know what items were bought or sold, because remember, we're going to talk about that, or you don't know that yet, but remember that we're going to enter separately the details around the items, how much we have and what the value is in another place. So we don't need to duplicate that, right? So we bring in these open payables and open receivable definitions. And then on the item side, we bring in item quantities by warehouse, if you're using warehouses, by bins, if you classify things into bins or shelves, serial number, by lot, by variant. So as applicable, you're going to want to bring that data in. Inventory valuation. So by warehouse, again, if applicable. So if you have multiple warehouses, then you want to know how much do you have of each item in dollars and cents besides the quantities and those breakdowns. You want the dollar and cent breakdown as well by warehouse if applicable. So normally, you have these happen every day, so you don't want to check, you don't want to keep updating Business Central with this information every day until you've cut over. Again, we'll go back to the whens some more on my slides coming up, but as I go through too, sometimes I want to keep priming that for you, right? The when is important. It's not just the what and how much, there's also the when component that's really significant. For those of you who are using fixed assets or resources or so on, there may be some of that to bring in as well. So just kind of putting a little asterisk there. You may want to do your fixed assets. You might want to set your book value for those fixed assets and so on. When? Master data. Your main loader, that first time you're bringing in, do it up front. Do it early on in the project. Usually when the project starts, one of the first things you want to do is extract that information, set that up. So much of that master and supplemental data, when I say master here, I'm also talking about the supplemental data that we had, the currency exchange rates or the currencies, your resources with your resource prices and so on. So bring that in, and then incremental changes over the life of the project. That varies. The best practice for that would vary from project to project based on how long it's going to go and how often those changes happen. Now, if your business adds new customers at a really quick clip, and over the course of a few months, you're going to have 100 or 200 new customers, then you could do an incremental upload. And what you'll find is Business Central's data migration tools are quite friendly in that if you're bringing in data, it can let you just bring in the incremental records. A lot of other systems and internal tools are going to be the same way. Now, otherwise, going back, and if you have only a couple of customers or vendors, then you just might want to type them in. It's also a data entry practice for your team members. Forgot that, so my bad there. Transactional data. Opening balances that we talked about, right? So kind of using the same reference points I did before. If you have data from 12/31/2017 that you're bringing in as opening balances, do that up front. That data isn't changing. It hasn't changed since 2017 when you closed it. So bring that in. Let's start priming the system. Net changes through all the periods that have been closed or your last closed year. So in my example here, we said we're a calendar year company. So by now, by September, October of 2020, I imagine that you've got your 2019 closed. I certainly hope you have. Otherwise, boy, I'm glad you're moving to a new system, because if your old system can't close the books in 9-10 months, you've got a problem. But bring those in. They're already closed. They're good to go, and get them into Business Central. Now, ongoing net changes. as months close during the project, you can bring them in. So let's say, I would imagine if you started this project in September, you may at least have books closed through July. So you're probably bring them in June or July. You're going to bring all that in. Maybe you still have August. Somebody's auditing that. Maybe you have August closed. Great if you have. Um, I know we're kind of not a whole lot of time has passed, but still, whatever is closing as this project progresses, go ahead and you can bring them on as the month closes, or you can do it all at cutoff. Now, everybody does it a little bit differently, but in our experience and the way we do it here at DSWI, we tend to do our cutoff usually when a month ends and a new month starts. And we are not always so lucky that it happens on the first of the month. So what we might do is the first weekend before, the first weekend after the start of a month. Kind of going in, we'll start out, kind of try to line up a cutoff for Thursday or Friday. And then at that point, you stop entering data in your old system, and the consultant goes in and runs these at cutoff type of imports, right? So these are also going to be your things that you're bringing in, like your OpenAP, OpenAR, all that stuff is going to be at that point. Your inventory situation, what is your balance on hand for each item? What is the inventory valuation? Those are things that are going to be done at cutoff. Some things are going to be done after cutoff. So that last month before go live, chances are you're going to go live, and then that month is going to be closed a few weeks later. And so what you're going to do is you're going to go live on the new system. You'll start running your transactions. And at some point when the books are closed in the old system, you're going to bring that month's detail in. But remember that in the interim, you will have inaccurate financials from certain perspectives. Your P&L or your income statement is going to be dead on correct until through that last month that was closed in the old system and in Business Central. So all that information is going to be good and proper. Your P&L for the current month in Business Central is going to be correct as well, but P&L over the course of the year will be incorrect because you're missing about a month's worth of financial detail or 2 months worth of financial detail as you go live. So until you bring those in, some of those are going to be off. Your balance sheets, if you try to run that as of 9/30/2020, is going to be inaccurate again because you don't have some data from about 1 or 2 months. So those are things that you got to remember to kind of just as you're running financial reports, just be mindful of that. It's not that the implementation has failed or it's not right. It's just you have a gap in data, and that gap we've always known was going to be filled in after the go live period. Oh, another best practice, physical inventory. I definitely try to do that before if you can, or soon after. Don't leave that for a long time, because what you don't want to do again is bring in erroneous data. Remember I was talking about transform? Physical inventory is not necessarily part of transform, although you could consider it such. Make sure you're bringing in the right inventory amounts in the new system, because that alongside your unit prices or unit costs are going to impact the valuation in the system. So you want to make sure this is being done as accurately as possible. So if you can afford to, do that physical inventory before cutover. If not, do it soon after, so within a month or so you could still kind of do these as part of your initial go live things, and data gets screwed up quickly, that you're not waiting till the end of the year to do all of that. Okay, OpenAP, OpenAR, I forgot that I had a bullet point for it. I already mentioned that earlier. You do want to do this at cutover. So as of that, whatever cutover date you have, you want to make sure that you look at what's owed to you and what do you owe as of that time, and then bring them over into the system. This is an important consideration. What about open sales orders and open purchase orders? Well, I'd say this is a case-by-case scenario. All right, if you have a handful of open sales orders and purchase orders, and you actually haven't started receiving goods against those POs or shipping goods from those sales orders, recommendation is you rekey them into Business Central and handle them from here. If they've been done partially, if you have some partial receipts, at that point, it's best to actually complete them in the old system, because remember, at cutover, you're bringing in inventory quantities based on things that you've received or things you've shipped, right? So those become, you don't want to duplicate things in the system. So consider what you're doing on, whether you've received or shipped, if they're partial or so on, and then determine maybe you should just complete that transaction in the old system instead of just rekeying that into Business Central, right? So as I wrap up, I want to talk about a couple of topics that are important. One is the general ledger and the subledger links, and why this is an important topic is that customers often ask, and have many times have asked me over the years, we want to bring in the last 5 years of sales details. I want to know every invoice number. I want to know every item I've sold, who I sold it to, what the customer prices were, so on. And not fully understanding how ERP systems work, oftentimes the desire is to see them in the same place where they see Business Central sales history. Well, remember early on in the presentation, I talked about when you post a transaction in Business Central, multiple things happen. So if I have a sales transaction and I say I fulfilled that sales transaction, it doesn't just go and sit in a table disjointed from the general ledger. It posts to the general ledger as well. So things that it's going to do, it's going to post to the customer subledger the date of the transaction, who the customer is, the amount, and when it's due, and if it's been paid. It's going to go to the item ledgers, subledgers, and it's going to post what we sold, from where, the valuation, and so on. It's going to go to the general ledger, and it's going to post your debits and credits, your debits to your AR, your credit to your revenue, and so on. And so you're going to get all of those happening as well. So we can't do those things in a vacuum. And certainly when I post a transaction that's already occurred, I have these numbers or these transaction identifiers that can be changed. So PO1234 would have resulted in posted purchase invoice 2345 in your old system. Well, I can't always guarantee or layer it with thousands and thousands of transactions over the years with exactly the same transaction ID numbers. So because we can't break the general ledger and the subledger links in Business Central, one of two things must happen. Either you reconcile yourself to the fact that some of that information is not nearly as important as you think it is, and that you don't need it, or in a lot of cases, you may continue to have access to your old system, especially if it was not a subscription system, on old servers. That you may just reboot that server when you need it, in the few occasions that it's needed, or keep it running on a virtual machine or another server for about 6 months to a year until you've sufficiently weaned off on it. Or we would bring them into an archival table. An archival table is basically one or more custom tables that we build, and that's going to be in Business Central. And what we've done when we've built these archival tables is basically set it up on, say, a customer card. So you can look at standard Business Central history, and you look at the customer ledger for that, or you go to items and item ledger, so on. Or from a customer or an item card, we say old system history. Maybe there's a better word for it, but I'm just kind of, I think using that word to make it easy for everybody. Or archive. And when you click that, it's going to open another table that could be in header and line format that can open up line by line all the transactions. And then you open a transaction, it'll show you a document form. What was, things, identifiers from the header in the old system, the customer, the customer's PO number, the date of the transaction, or so on. And then the lines, what we sold and how much, and what the price was, what the discount was, what the total amounts were. So they now live in Business Central, but disjointed from the standard Business Central history, ledger, and subledgers. And that gives you the best of both worlds. All right, so if you must have that, then work with your consultants to do that. That's a best practice, because don't try to squeeze that data in or back it into a subledger. You won't be able to do that in the cloud version at all, but even in the on-prem version, don't try to do that. You're going to create a lot of reconciliation errors down the road. It's just bad practice. Now, final thoughts, again, kind of just bringing this full circle, that if you have your old system from Microsoft, if you're moving from, say, Great Plains to Business Central, or from SL to Business Central, you are still going to be licensed to run the old system as an archival system by Microsoft. So you're not required to shut it down. You're just using one system or Business Central as your system of record. If you have other systems like QuickBooks, if they're perpetually installed on your computers, then for a while it's okay to maybe run that on the side, not to enter transactions, not suggesting that at all, but to maybe refer to them as needed. And over time, what you'll realize is you'll need them so infrequently that you might just shut it down and open it turn it on once a year, if at all. If you were using another SaaS system, then most SaaS systems do allow you to do a data dump. And then what you could do is take that data, put it into a MySQL or a Microsoft SQL database, and we could use Power BI or another business intelligence tool to marry and aggregate that data with data from Business Central. Or even going on the last slide, that archival table that I talked about, You could also create Power BI reports that marry data from archival tables to data that's now in Microsoft Business Central's or Dynamics 365 Business Central's uh, new or current subledgers or general ledgers. So those are a lot of things that are possible with a business intelligence tool like Power BI. So definitely consider that as a tool as well. Maybe that's something that you look at after you go live. This doesn't have to be available day one, but over time, this can allow you to marry data from old systems to new systems, or really even other systems that you might have. A lot of businesses will have proprietary databases that are not directly linked to ERP function, but perhaps for some front end of your business or some other departmental need, and that data doesn't get put into Business Central. You could use Power BI to marry them. So I hope this system or this presentation session was important and useful for you or valuable for you. Here's my information here, AJA at DSWIUS, or you can follow me on Twitter at AJ Ansari Nav. Just a word of caution, you're just as likely to hear me talk about Formula One or college football as you are to hear me talk about Business Central, so be advised. But it was a real pleasure for me again. I'd like to thank DynamicsCon. And if there are any questions, let's move to those.